My name's Mike McMullen. I'm president of the Chamber. I want to welcome you all here. It's great that we get to do this specific meeting every year. And sometimes we look at it and we say, well, we've done the same thing every year for year after year after year, and it's because it's really a good meeting. It's really good to have a meeting like this where we bring the business community together with our elected officials at the actual state level for you to get to know them, because you can get your input heard, either by joining our legislative committee, of which we could use some help, or just getting to know them, going to Annapolis to give testimony on a bill, contacting them, letting them know your opinion on things. They need to hear from you guys. They don't have all knowledge, although they'll probably tell you that they're all knowledgeable. That was a joke, guys. But they could use your input on a lot of things.
Welcome to the Chamber's Legislative Kickoff Breakfast. The Carroll County Chamber of Commerce has over 700 businesses, and we've been building relationships since 1924. Relationships drive business. Today we shine a spotlight on another type of relationship that we seek to strengthen and grow. The relationship between our business community and our elected officials, who are part of the Carroll County Delegation to the Maryland General Assembly in Annapolis.
And before we begin, just a reminder that any views expressed here today are those of the speaker alone, and not necessarily those of the chamber, its members, or its sponsors. We have some new faces with us this time around, so that's great. And it's a great time to introduce yourselves to the business community here in Carroll County.
It's a great honor to represent Carroll County in the state senate again for this next term. I really consider it something that is a great responsibility. I do enjoy doing it. Sometimes I wonder why I enjoy doing it. It depends on it depends on about midway through the legislative session. Sometimes I start enjoying it a little less, but I do enjoy the opportunity to represent Carroll County. My approach as I look ahead to the next legislative session in Annapolis, my children have gotten really into Star Wars now. They love Star Wars. We've been watching the movies, and they got some great Legos that thankfully their grandparents bought for them, not me, because they're very expensive. I had to put them. I had to help my wife and I had to put them together. But I always think of us. You have Republican members up here. All of us are Republican in the delegation, and all of us are, I think it's fair to say, pro-business, pro-job creation. We believe in limited government. I think I'm not speaking out of turn for anybody up here. We believe in limited government and generally conservative fiscal principles. And that's not really. It shouldn't really be a partisan issue, in my opinion. But sometimes it becomes that way. In Annapolis, we're sort of like the rebels. You know, we're like the Rebel Alliance, and the people who are in control in Annapolis are a little bit more like the Empire. Just the Empire. We won't say the other word that goes with Empire, but the Empire. The current majority party is very much controlled by a pretty far left group of interests and activists and elected officials, and they come from a totally different perspective. And our job is, of course, to work with the people our job is to work with everybody that we serve with. We're all trying to do, I think, in fairness, what's best, we feel like is best for our communities. The problem we're going to have in Annapolis is that more and more over the past 2 or 3 election cycles, really, but it's really stark now, there's a belief that if there's a societal problem, we as politicians should work with our business community to address those societal problems, even if it has nothing to do with your business. Your business is a vehicle by which we address inequity, by which we address needs people have, by which we address people's economic needs. Of course, we know that the best kind of economic growth, the best kind of way to raise people up out of poverty, for example, is a good job. And so strengthening and empowering our small businesses and our large businesses, too, to be the best that they can be, to be profitable, to be successful, is really important. But there's a lot of disagreement with how we get there. And the biggest issue from a business standpoint that I think we'll be seeing this session will be the implementation of Maryland's new paid we have paid sick leave, which we've already passed mandatory paid sick leave, but now there's going to be the opportunity for people to take extended time off to care for a family member, or to have, and there's going to be a program that every business and every worker in the state, whether they want to or not, has to pay into, that then workers will be able to take extended time off, up to 6 months at a time off, and that was passed last year, but of course, conveniently, the implementation was moved till after the election. And essentially what we did was pass a framework, a funding framework and structure the General Assembly passed, I did not support it, that sets up, you're going to start being charged next year, or actually maybe in this calendar year, I think in the next part of this year, but we don't completely know how it's going to work yet. So they've set up a framework and now they're studying, they've set up a way to fund it, now they're studying how to implement it. I argued, if you have to pass something to say you pass it, can we pass it and say we're going to put it off till we fully study it and do actuarial studies? That suggestion was rejected. So that's going to be a major thing and I'm on the Finance Committee in the Senate, that will come through. All the business regulation and labor legislation comes through the Finance Committee in the Senate. So that's going to be a major, major focus for us this year. I could say a lot more. I'll stop though because I've already exceeded my 5 minutes. So thank you very much, though. Again, I look forward to questions, and we appreciate, again, the opportunity to serve, and thank you very much.
My philosophy essentially is I want my grandchildren someday to be able to find a good job which will keep them here in the state of Maryland and not having them go out of state to get employed. And I want them to have a safe and healthy environment in which to live. So you'll find that I support business almost all the time. And I also support, unlike many Republicans, others, I support environmental measures a lot of the time. So I have a strong business rating and a strong environmental rating. I would not want, for example, Carroll County to be degraded in future years by people who rapaciously destroy the environment. One of the things, I'll just give you one bill that I've pushed and I will continue to push, is we're going to build a lot of schools in the next decade. We're going to spend $32 billion building schools. That's a lot of schools. Every county is going to have schools. These days the schools don't have peaked roofs, they have flat roofs. I do not want solar panels to go on farmland. I want solar panels to go where they ought to go, which is on top of roofs. And so my bill requires any county that wants to build a school to at least consider whether or not they should put solar panels on their roof. And if they decide not to do it, they should explain why they made that decision and send that explanation to what's called the Interagency Commission on School Construction. I want solar panels to go on roofs, not on prime agricultural farmland, which we have far too little of in the state of Maryland. One last thing, and that was, as Justin indicated, I represent Hampstead, and I got introduced to folks in the Hampstead Fire Department and learned that they have to tear their fire station down because the entranceways are too small for the modern fire engines to fit. So they're going to have to spend a lot of money building a new fire station. So I said, I think maybe I can do something about that. I called up my friends in the Department of the Budget, and I said, could we get Governor Hogan in his final budget to put a nice, healthy appropriation for the Hampstead Volunteer Fire Company? And lo and behold, when the governor unveiled his budget about 6 weeks ago, there it was, a very substantial amount of money allocated for the Hampstead Volunteer Fire Company. Now, whether or not that makes its way into the new governor's budget, remember Governor Hogan's last budget is merely a suggestion as to what the new governor ought to do. The new governor could decide to strip that money out of the budget, but I've got my fingers crossed that it will remain in the budget and Hampstead will be benefited. So it's these kinds of ways in which your state senators and your state delegates can help you, and you need to communicate with us and let us know what's important to you. And with that, I will step down and take questions later. Thank you.
As pointed out earlier, I am one of the incoming freshman delegates, alongside with Josh Stanko and Eric Boucher. One of the things I thought I would touch on is, so I did not realize this going into it, but as a freshman delegate, they actually have you go through all these orientation-related things, and it's actually been overall good experience. Sometimes you have to make sure you cut through some of the, through some of the propaganda they were throwing at you. But there's about 38 of us I think it's 38 new delegates, 11 Republicans, and then the rest are all Democrats. So I'm sure you can imagine, that's kind of, how that works out. But it was nice during the orientation. They purposely went out of their way to make sure that you weren't sitting with you weren't just sitting with everybody from your own party or everybody from Carroll County. They kind of mixed you up, so you got a chance to sit with and talk with Baltimore City Democrats, Montgomery County Democrats. And I think it was a really great experience getting to get to know these folks, but getting to talk about issues. And it seems like we, for the most part, can agree on what the problems are, the solutions. We have different ideas on what the solutions are. I mean, for example, we were talking about the drug issues in across Maryland, with fentanyl and opioids, and several of my Democrat colleagues were bringing up some of the success that's come with the safe injection sites, using them. I talked about instead, how about, whereas treatment is, I think, an absolutely major part of the issue, but also really coming down hard on the scumbags that are bringing this into Carroll County or into the state of Maryland. Really, throwing everything in the book at them. And that's pretty much where I lost the conversation with my Democrat colleagues. They don't believe that we need more laws to throw people in jail. So it's been definitely eye-opening to meet my incoming colleagues and to get an idea of where they're coming from. I for at least the next 8 days before we start, I guess I'll remain bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and hope that we're all going to get along until we get sworn in and they've got their boss to report to, the speaker. But for the rest of us, no, I know we're all very excited to get down there, and it's going to be quite a learning experience. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Josh Stanko. I am the new delegate-elect for 42C. To not repeat what Senator Reedy and what Senator West covered, which are two important areas of focus coming into this coming session, I'm going to talk a little bit about workforce development. I know we have individuals from our school system here. We have a very complex and challenging implementation coming up for Carroll County and the Kerwin Commission and changes that requires with regards to funding. And ultimately what that looks like for students, right? So we're all thinking about, as parents, as community members, what does that look like how does that end with our students? How does those students create a workforce for ideally Carroll County and for the state of Maryland? The Kerwin Commission for Carroll County is a lot more challenging than it is for some of our sister counties and cities, with the way that funding was established and the earmarks and particular silos, for lack of a better term, and where those funds go. The biggest challenge that I see in this is classroom sizes and what the funding does to ultimately, or the requirements do to ultimately pigeonhole and leave us with limited options that we have to implement. And one of the ways that mostly shows up, if we were to look at it today, would be increased classroom sizes. And that is a concern for me and should be a concern for anyone here that hires individuals and thinking about what students become for employees and how that kind of full implementation works. So for me, as we get down there, I'm interested to see what the governor-elect brings forward. I think he is a very different kind of politician that we've seen from the general apparatus and establishment of Annapolis politicians. He has a unique background, including a business background, but his stump speech is very consistently on education. He talks about two things very consistently, which is education and a social platform for post-grads to have a year of what I'm going to call social work. I don't know a better way to put it. He says it. So inside of that, I think it creates an opportunity for us as a delegation to sit down and attempt to find some ways to maneuver around bringing additional non-earmarked funding to the county, or create or discuss some way to soften some of the challenges that are particular to suburban and rural counties with regards to those funding. So I'm already almost out of time, but that's going to be a top priority for me. I think it should be a top priority for every every one of the delegation members, and I think I speak for everyone here that it is. So thank you, and appreciate everybody having me today.
The voters approved legalizing marijuana as of July 1 of this year. That's when it will be legal. A little bit of fine print on the ballot was that subject to regulation by the General Assembly. That was not going to be on the ballot actually until myself and a couple of Republican senators in the committee held the bill up and said, you really should put something on the ballot that says we're not just legalizing it as of July 1. I wanted him to have a lot more explanation on the ballot because if you're a lobbyist, marijuana is like medical and legalized marijuana are just like this amazing Christmas tree for you as a lobbyist. There are so many lobbyists that are employed trying to get some piece of the pie with the medical marijuana side and now with the legalized marijuana side. There's been some very in-depth commissions that have come out with recommendations about how to implement the legal marijuana industry. But there's a lot of competing factions and factors. One of the biggest issues is few of the biggest issues are how you're going to tax it, of course. That's the point of legalizing it. How much are you going to tax it? If you tax it too much, like Illinois did, you're going to end up with a black market, illegal market again, because people try to avoid the tax. Are you going to treat medical marijuana? Are you going to continue to make sure that's treated differently and as treated as medicine, which is why I supported medical marijuana, because it's something that can be used for medicine. What is the legal marijuana market going to do to the medical marijuana market, where you can have people self-medicating with the recreational marijuana? Are you going to ensure there's going to be an effort to ensure that the communities that have been impacted perhaps the most by the drug war have an opportunity for an equal or perhaps more than technically 50-50 equal share of who gets to do recreational marijuana, who gets to profit from it? I'm not a big fan of set-asides like that, but in this case, I actually am like, well, it's not a bad argument. And it's certainly one that will probably carry the day in Annapolis. So how the different licenses, how you're going to license, how the different licenses get distributed, all of that has to be decided in the next 90 days. And it all comes to the Senate Finance Committee, so I'm looking forward to learning a lot more about marijuana. But we spent a lot of time trying to hash that out in the past. There's been the medical marijuana implementation was a nightmare. The state was mired in lawsuits for years and years over who got the licenses. Was it a fair process? It wasn't fair, but what do you do to the people who got licenses in the unfair process? So we want to avoid that, I think, speaking in a bipartisan way. And this is an area I don't know that there's going to be as much like partisanship about this issue, hopefully. Hopefully we're going to try to figure out what makes sense to work so that the state can profit from it, but also so that it is regulated. I didn't support legalizing it. I think it's a mistake. But it's going to be legal now. And so how are we going to handle an increase of drug driving, which will happen? How are we going to, on the law enforcement side, how are we going to handle people trafficking that aren't supposed to have it differently from how we handle it now, which was just an illegal substance? So I don't really give you any answers there, just a whole lot of questions. But that's going to be a big, in my committee, every committee in the General Assembly kind of has its own ethos and ecosystem. That's going to be one of the biggest things I think we spend a lot of time on, finance, and I think it goes to the Health and Government Operations Committee in the House, I think. So those two committees will probably be spending a lot of time working on and hearing from all sides about that. And I would guarantee you we'll pass something, and then the next session we'll be back, and they'll be fighting about it because something will have been left out. So it's going to be a big battle moving forward, and so we'll see how it goes.
The blueprint is going to be the subject of amending legislation in the next session. There are lots of things that have to be tweaked. There are lots of things that are not going to work, that have to be fixed. So that legislation is basically going to be a piece of legislation full of amendments to the existing law. I hope that we can get there on behalf of Carroll County and get a couple of amendments through which will help Carroll County. They sort of fall in two categories. One is take money away from other counties and give it to Carroll County. That's going to be a serious uphill lift. The other is providing for exemptions, which would let counties like Carroll County be exempt from certain requirements of the existing law. That's going to be far easier to do. So I'm hoping we as a delegation can get together. And I'm hoping that the Carroll County School Board can provide us with your best list of things that you would like to have us do in the order of priority so that we can take a look at that and we can try to accomplish what you want us to accomplish rather than us think for ourselves. Frequently, it's not good when legislators think for themselves.
Governor-elect Moore is going to drive a lot of the conversations that are happening in Annapolis, right? So in the last 8 years, it was always a negotiation between Governor Hogan, the Speaker, and the Senate President, right? And every one of those conversations, if it wasn't starting from a place of true negotiation, it was going to a veto, and that veto going back for conversation around veto override, right? So the difference generally speaking, the difference in a session like the one we have coming up is that while there may not be full deference, the governor-elect will drive a lot of the decision-making, the conversations that are happening. And so I think one of the unique things about the governor-elect is I said his background is different, right? He truly isn't a career politician, right? So he was an investment banker. He was a business, he ran the largest nonprofit, as he says, which Robin Hood truly is, a large national nonprofit, and it was a small business owner before that. And so the difference between him and some of his historical predecessors is that he has been there. What that means for the policy that he's trying to drive could look completely different when he's in a governor role than when he is in those roles. But I do think that when we're sitting down and having those conversations and then they're happening, there will be an empathy that from that perspective that is there that maybe hasn't been there sometimes in the past. And so leaning into that and leaning into organizations like yours to bring forward that conversation that it isn't just large corporations and driving the decision making through them, as Senator Reedy had kind of mentioned, like driving it through the corporate enterprises is critical, right? Small business coming forward, giving their points of view, nonprofits coming forward, giving their points of view, and everybody else in between. So I think that that's going to be a core driving framework of where that lands.
One of the interesting things that a Governor Moore brings to the table is I have no illusions about. I think there will be certain things that he's very conventionally about that are probably opposite the way I feel about a lot of issues, and that we feel. But on one of the things his transition team has talked a lot about, has some documentation they put out, is the challenge of workforce development, which we all agree is a problem. And currently in the state government, and I don't take this as a shot at Governor Hogan necessarily, but workforce development is very siloed. It's like there's a bunch of different departments that have a workforce development component to them, and the Moore administration transition team and what you do with the transition team is you go and analyze every state agency. What are they doing? What are they doing well? What do they say they could do better? What do they say they do well? What do we think they could do better? All that. And workforce development is one where they say we really would like to get everything, not necessarily under one roof, because that's not practical, but have a lot less siloing so that it's more clear all the workforce development opportunities there are and what should get funding. So that's a very general answer to your specific question, but I think there are opportunities in the workforce development space to get funding for things that are truly working. And it may be that a Carroll County, the library system may be a better place for workforce development funds than maybe it might be even in another county. I'm sure your colleagues won't agree. They're all different. So it could be that part of that is the discussion we can have, all of us, with how do we make sure that if Carroll County library system has these great programs, and we do, maybe there's stuff that they fund in the budget that goes to things in Carroll County where maybe it's just not as robust of a program for a variety of reasons. We're a more rural county, all those things. So I think it's a great time to be having those discussions. And I do think, hopefully that's something that in a very bipartisan, nonpartisan way we can work with the incoming Moore administration on as well. I think that's a great question.
Let me just add, ours is a very pro-library family. My wife was on the board of the Pratt Library for many years. In the last 5 years, she's switched her allegiance. She's on the board of the Baltimore County Public Library. So I voted for every library bill in my years in Annapolis. If I didn't, when I got home on Friday, I'd find the locks had been changed and I couldn't get in the house. But no, seriously, I've found the category of bills which is perhaps easiest to pass on a bipartisan basis is library bills. So the state librarians, you need to get together and come down to Annapolis with a legislative agenda and get us to introduce it and push it on your behalf, and we'll get it passed. Unless it's unrealistic, we'll get it passed, because who can vote against libraries?
Thank you again. Delegation, maybe it's because a lot of you are new, but you guys are really stuck to the time constraints, and I want to thank you for that. That's good. I also want to wish you the best of luck. I'm sitting here thinking, I don't really know that I'd want one of your jobs kind of going someplace where most people think differently. And I think the only thing I want to say is, I'm trying to think, well, how could I get people on the other side to see things the way that I might see, to work along with me? And I'm thinking, well, sometimes the best way to do that is to say, what should I not do? And that's not march up there thinking, these guys are the enemy, they're all wrong, they're all full of you know what. And the fact that it's relationships that drive everything. In our personal life, in the work life, that's what we say at the Chamber. It's all about relationships. And you guys have an excellent relationship as a team, but I guess the key is figuring how do you work with the others to let them know that you respect them, even though you might differ from them, because it's the only way that I think you could possibly get something done, unless there was a major influx of people moving out of Maryland to vote a different way and moving in. So I just wish you the best of luck in building relationships across the aisle to make things happen. So thank you.